Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt. Today's guest is someone who brings depth, wisdom, and a wonderfully practical approach to one of the most important and sometimes hard to pin down ideas in psychology: values. Dr. Jenna LeJeune is a clinical psychologist, researcher, and author of the brilliant book Values in Therapy, which she co-wrote with Jason Loomer. In this conversation, we dive into why values matter, how we can help people reconnect with what truly gives life meaning, and how pain, paradoxically, can sometimes point the way. And there's a surprise along the way. Have you ever heard of becoming a truffle dog for values? Stick around. It's one of the best metaphors you'll hear about how we therapists can help our clients sniff out what really matters. And so I bring you Dr. Jenna LeJeune. Dr. Jenna LeJeune, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Wonderful. I thought we might start at the what and why of values. So, what are values, I suppose, but also why are values so central to in therapy, but perhaps, psychological well-being generally?
Yeah. Well, I don't have the monopoly on values, and so as I'm saying what values are, what I mean is this is like how I speak about them. It's not some truth. There are lots of ways that people talk about values, but
Hmm.
when I think about values, I'm basic or from an act or contextual behavioral science perspective, we're basically talking about ongoing patterns of behavior or ways of being in the world that you choose to make important. So these are qualities of action. It's essentially who you want to be in this world if you were totally free to choose, if your behavior wasn't about trying to get rid of something painful or unpleasant, but it was really a free choice. What ways of being in the world are most important to you? So that's basically what I mean when I'm talking about values. If I'm describing this to clients, I will say something like, when I use the term values, I mean it's how you're living when you're living a meaningful life. And that part of it, I think, is really important. It's you'll hear in that definition from this perspective, values are action. So it's
Hmm.
not, sometimes people will think of values and they'll say, oh, I value family or I value work or those sorts of things. And those might be really important arenas of your life, but that doesn't tell you how you want to show up in those arenas. And so values, as I use that word, are really how do you want to show up in those important arenas of your life?
Hmm. Family might be a valued arena,
Yeah.
and then we bring certain values which are action based to sort of thoroughly support and can and be in that arena the way that is important to us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like I want to show up playfully and lovingly and big-heartedly in that arena of family, for example.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. They're sort of ly words.
Yeah.
I can't remember what that is in
Yeah, yeah, like an
grammar, but
adverb. Yeah,
adverbs.
yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of
Yes.
adverbs in a way that they involve verbs or action
Mhm.
and so on. And but yeah, it really is. And I like that notion of free choice. Like putting other things aside, and you were able to freely choose. What is important to you, and how would you like to kind of conduct yourself or be in the world. There are your values. And so what is it that makes them so central and important?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, when you get down to everything, I would think most of us humans, at least I will speak for me, y- you basically you want to live a good life.
Hmm.
How to live well is sort of a main goal that humans have. And values define what a good life would be. They are my definition of I am living well when I'm living in line with my values. So, in that way, I mean, I get that I'm a person who focuses on values in my professional and personal life. So, I'm a little bit biased in this, but I do sort of feel like they are the important thing. They tell you what living a good life would be.
They kind of scaffold everything in a way, I suppose. I don't know if that's the right way to
Hopefully,
say it, but yeah, well,
hopefully,
try
yeah.
to. Mm,
Yeah, yeah, and that's a lot of the work in therapy or in our everyday life is how do we start getting intentional about having our values guide or serve as the compass to what is orienting our behavior, as opposed to some of these other things that will push our behavior around if we're not being intentional about it.
mm,
And so hopefully it forms a scaffolding in our life, but we all get off course. And so part of my work in therapy with people is helping people sort of be intentional about noticing when they're in line, living in line with their values and when they're not.
mm. It's sort of towards a living a good life or a life that we feel is a good life for us. And it's hard,
Yep.
isn't it? Because not always does living a good life mean a life that feels good all the time. Sometimes we're having to, push on with certain values, directed, choices and so on that can sometimes be tough or tricky or even uncomfortable, I guess. But it's that sense of living the kind of good life that feels important to us.
Absolutely, absolutely. My niece hates it when I use this example, but when she's older now, but when she was, a tween, and I can remember having these like very long conversations with her about like whatever person she had a crush on. And it was not the most thrilling conversation for me to have all of the time. But when I could really tap into, hey, my value here is I care about this young woman so deeply and I really want to be present to her. It's that value that would then guide me to really staying present to the conversation. Not because it was that interesting of a conversation to me. So you're exactly right. It's not always the
Mm,
thing I want to be doing at any given moment. Yeah.
mm. And after this conversation, I'll be having to go for my half an hour walk in where it's winter here at the moment, and
Right,
so
right.
like my health arena, I
Yep.
guess I have certain
Yep.
values that service that sense of healthy living well, and so I'm going to have to go for that walk, even if it's yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. Which I suppose starts to be where psychological flexibility comes in, perhaps. The sort of you've talked before in your book about just this link between values and psychological flexibility. How do you see flexibility really supporting people to live more fully in line with their values, especially when, I mean, life just presents various challenges or disappointments or discomforts or suffering for that matter.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the answer is in exactly what you just said there. Like, if this were just a matter of like, hey, I want to live a life in line with my values, that's all I would be doing with myself, with my clients. I would just be focusing on values. But it turns out life does involve suffering and pain, you know?
Yes.
All the major religions of the world got that one right. And
Yes.
so we need some tools to be able to navigate through those times of suffering or pain or barriers, other barriers that show up as we're moving towards our values. And so if I speak from, an ACT therapist, and so if I use that language, skills like being able to remain present, skills like being able to have whatever your psychological, emotional experience is, acceptance, being able to notice thoughts and not get too attached to them, diffusion. Those skills are really essential if we want to stay on track with our values. So that's why I work on those skills with myself and others. It's not because those in and of themselves are all that essential or all that meaningful, I would say. It's the values that's meaningful.
Gotcha. Yeah, they're certain skills that we might use to sort of navigate the ups and downs of values-based action. Sort of awareness and acceptance and diffusion is a way to stay flexible with whatever it might be that happens next. I've noticed I've really become more and more just aware in my own practice the value of psychological flexibility for people. It's often a source of suffering, isn't it, when we struggle with things that don't quite go the way we might have hoped or preferred, or even when it's to do with our values and trying to live those values, and then we struggle with the things that get in the way, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean if you check with your own experience, certainly my experience, it's in that struggle that as soon as I start struggling with those things, now I'm getting pulled off course from moving towards my values. And so that's where we want to be able to be present, be noticing and aware in a conscious way of, oh, there I am struggling with my experience. And then having some tools to know how to maybe let go of that a bit. And then maybe most relevant for the thing for this podcast is, and how do we do that in a way that is kind or gentle or compassionate or how whatever word you want to use for that,
Mm.
rather than a kind of a pushing. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that's interesting. Compassion. I'll ask you more specifically about your thoughts around compassion too later, but yes, it comes in there really with psychological flexibility, that it's taking a kind, compassionate approach to our experience of life and all its challenges, and
Hmm.
sort of not getting caught in the struggle, which can take us away from that intentional sort of choosing of our life and our actions,
Yeah,
but instead
absolutely.
staying the course, I guess, in a
Yeah.
way. One of the ones that people often mention for me is the struggle between two equally great values that are a little bit in opposition. What are your thoughts there with respect to, I guess, psychological flexibility, perhaps, but other things?
Yeah. Well, part of why I like a psychological flexibility model is that it there's no right answer there, right? And
Mm,
so what I would say is if you're telling me that, hmm, let me see, if values are freely chosen, which is by definition, that's a core definition element to values in from this perspective. If they're freely chosen, then I want all of the values to be available to me at all times. So saying that they would be mutually exclusive or in conflict isn't super workable. And
mm,
so from my perspective, I would say that's not true. They can't be mutually exclusive. It might be that you have to learn how to express those values in creative ways depending on your context. That's the psychological flexibility model. Let me give you an example of that. So I do have a very strong value around being really big-hearted. The kind of the best word I can think of for this value that I like living out. And how I live big-heartedly with my dear niece Josephine looks very different than how I live big-heartedly when I'm sitting in the room with a client than when I am interacting with somebody that I'm in conflict with. But I can still live out that big-hearted value. And so I like to think of values. I really enjoy food and I'm kind of a foodie and I love cooking. So I use the metaphor of a recipe. It's like values are the ingredients of this wonderful recipe of a well-lived life. So sometimes big-heartedness is the main ingredient in my recipe. And then I have a little bit of whimsy and a little bit of playfulness and a little bit of whatever in it. And it can shift based on the context, but they're not mutually exclusive.
Yes. Yeah, that's really helpful actually, because sometimes the example for me that I often kind of have pondered, I suppose. I was going to say grappled, but then that sounds like I'm in the struggle, so I'll say pondered. But is kind of authenticity and kindness. Like how do I
Yeah.
be real and
Yes.
true to myself, and also kind, and sometimes to be real means to express something that another person might find find difficult, and to be
Mhm.
kind might mean I might need to not necessarily say what I think. And but I think what you're saying is actually the sort of the secret sauce, I guess, is in the integration still, that
Yeah.
both can be present in either
Absolutely.
of those sort of leaning either way, that both of those values can still be present. It's about finding your way to that, I suppose, and practicing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and very often like that's such a beautiful example of authenticity and kindness. Like if we take a step back and look at the broader context, very often the kind thing, the kind action, the kind thing to do is to be authentic. It may still hurt, but not causing, like having somebody not experience some discomfort is not the same thing as living kindly. Those are two different things, right?
Mm,
So,
mm.
yeah.
Yeah, so I remember someone saying to me once that to give feedback, even if it is potentially a critique or of sorts, or that sort of thing, is the kind thing to do, because it gives them a chance to know what that feedback is, and to potentially take it in, and so on. To not give them that feedback is possibly unkind, because in a funny sort of a way, you're not giving them that chance, or something like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also thinking about how those values play out in your relationship with yourself. And
Mm,
so, how can I be open and learn and give myself feedback
mm.
in a way that is kind and gentle, as opposed to in a self-critical or punishing type of way?
Yes.
Um, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The ongoing practice, that one.
Yes,
So
right.
you said open-heartedness, I think,
Hmm.
and playfulness and whimsy, and like
Yeah.
this beautiful little collection there of some of your values. And I really like the metaphor of becoming a truffle dog for values, or something like that,
Oh, yeah.
to sort of to be able to sort of sniff them out in a way, and maybe to also help people to kind of sniff out their own values a little bit, and find their way. What are some of the ways that one might discover what those values are? Especially sometimes they're sort of a bit more buried beneath
Mhm.
life and life experiences, and even painful or old stories.
Yeah, like if you think about truffles, not the chocolates, the fungus, it's buried under a whole bunch of muck, right? And they're
Okay.
not just like sitting out there in the bright sunshine. They're usually in the like muddy, mucky places. And that is also usually really fertile soil for us to be able to explore our values as well. And so, some of the things that I do with my clients or that I encourage other people to do is try to get out of your head with this. You're going to have, and I have, all sorts of stories about what the right values are, or what I should value, or what I do value. And it's this very kind of cognitive thing. And I really like to have people pay attention to their felt experience instead. And so, I'll give you an example. Almost invariably, after a first session with a client, I give this homework and I ask them every day, I want you to track one moment when you felt most alive or there was a sense of vitality. And you'll notice that this is not necessarily happy. Like you might feel a lot of aliveness when you're fighting the good fight for something, right? So just note down what you were doing. And then it's not all that important what you were doing. But then what is one adjective or adverb that would describe how you were being in that moment? And then we take those adjectives and adverbs, these like potential words that point to values, and we look at them and say, like, okay, let's start kind of exploring in these areas and see, like, oh, I'm seeing like you really like this kind of being curious thing. Do you notice more moments of aliveness when you are curious? That might be a value you might choose. So
Mm.
that is kind of a way. And then I have people like I do a lot of noticing nonverbals. I notice when people's eyes light up. I notice when my voice changes or their voice changes. And I help people start tracking that with themselves as well.
Mm. The, the the word whimsy, for example, again,
Uh-huh.
going back to that, I mean, it's such a lovely word, evocative word, um, and I find sometimes it's hard to put values into words.
Yeah.
It sounds like, or just simply being able to think of the word that
Yeah.
captures what this felt sense is, and so on. And I notice you're in that little conversation or example, you might sort of say, I notice curiosity is something that perhaps helps or kind of feels a bit more vitality for you and so on. How do you sort of work with words, I suppose, when it
Yeah.
comes to discovering values and kind of vocabulary almost, I suppose.
It's super tricky because we are such verbal critters
Yeah.
that as soon as we start attaching words to things, then the word becomes a
Yes.
stand-in for the thing. And so I want to be very careful when I'm using words around values. That it's the word points to the value, but the word is not the value. But it can be helpful to have words to describe our experience. So I'll do things like, I might do a values card sort to help people just kind of give some options of words. But I have also had many, many clients who would leave doing values focused therapy with me and not have words that sound like values. So I will have people say, like, tree, fire, and arrow are my values.
Oh,
And that client knows what tree, fire, and arrow represents when they're living out those kind of qualities. But in no values card sort would you ever see those sorts of words. People have pictures of what it looks like. People have a felt sense of what it looks like. So what's really important is simply, can you track? Can you notice, oh, there it is. There it is right there. There's that whimsy. There's me being open-hearted. And when is it not?
yes. Oh, that's very, very helpful. That there can be lots of things that might point to the value. It might be
Mhm.
words, it might be
Yeah.
images, it might be unexpected words or metaphors or things like that. Um,
Yep.
and they're all sort of pointing to this more felt sense of what it is,
Yep.
and it just aids in that ability to see, okay, that's it, or there it is, or this is how it feels. I guess the next step being, what might I do? In the sense of action and sort of values based action in those moments.
Yeah. And maybe what would I do that would be in the service of that value, right?
Yes.
So if I have a choice of how I'm going to spend my time, or like even if I think about saying yes to this podcast,
Aha.
like you invited me and I was very pleased to be invited, but then I paused. And I was like, if I'm going to show up on this podcast, if this is how I'm going to choose to spend my time, what might that be in the service of?
Mm.
Would it be in the service of hey, this is an ego boost? Would it be in the service of, oh, hey, I want to look really smart? I hope not. Would it be in the service of, hey, maybe this could like help give a perspective to somebody who's maybe not coming into therapy?
Mm.
Maybe that's what I want it to be in the service of. So I get really clear on what do I want this to be in the service of? And then I'm tracking that throughout our conversation. Like when am I getting off course from that?
Right. Wow. Yes, there's a lot going on in a way, isn't there, with it, I suppose.
There is, yeah.
It is that intentional piece, and choice piece, and um, trying to think, I suppose, hold gently as well. And that's where we can slip into the more self-criticism bit, I guess, sometimes, am I doing my values, but actually just holding lightly this notion of intention and tracking, and yeah, how am
Yeah.
I going with that? Yeah.
Yeah. I think of it a bit like mindfulness meditation.
Mm,
Like the point for me of mindfulness meditation isn't to have your mind focused. It's to be able to notice, oh, there it wandered off, and to be able to have the skills to bring it back. And that's
yes.
the same thing with values. Like I'm not constantly living my values, but I have gotten fairly good at noticing, oh, there I'm off track, and I can bring myself back.
Mm. One of the sort of really curious elements too is the way that we might find our values in pain, I suppose,
Oh yeah.
or that because as you said, suffering is a part of life, I suppose, and suffering and struggle can sometimes point us to what really matters. The adversity can reveal within us, I guess, things that really matter. Would you be able to share an example there of how that kind of might unfold a little bit in especially in therapy?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'll do in therapy is, if somebody is really suffering or struggling in some way, I'll ask the question, like, what would you have to not care about in order for this to not hurt so much? So let's say it's the ending of a relationship. So what would you have to not care about in order for this loss to not be so painful for you? I'd have to not care about this loving relationship that is no longer there. I'd have to not care about connection or whatever it is. And would you choose that? Like, let's say we gave you the option of getting to live a life where you don't feel pain, but you also don't get to be a loving person. Is that a bargain you would want to make? And that can really help give people a sense of like, oh, there's actually it's not just pain is inevitable, but there's actually some honor to some pain. And I think
Mm,
about this in our values book. I talk about our dog Dolly
mm,
and walking her through this process of dying and how exquisitely painful that was for me.
mm,
And I kept having people who care deeply about me, wanting to do things to alleviate the pain, like, oh, it's okay. She's not that scared, whatever it is. And for me, what I needed to remember, why was that pain important? That pain is important because I want to be somebody who is present and consistent and loving in my life. And that to the critters in my life. And that means showing up to this little critter who's dying. And I'm going to do it even when it's so painful for me.
mm. Yes, I've had that experience relatively recently myself.
Oh,
That not well, not so recently, about a year ago, but
yeah.
yes, and I remember as a younger man, I suppose, going through a particular, relational challenge, sort of
Hmm.
stumbling across that idea that pain is almost like a measure of the love,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that there is something in honoring that piece of it in a way, and it oddly partly reassures or makes sense of that
Yeah.
experience of the pain, and yes, if you were to switch off the pain, then you kind of would be switching off the love, and that kind of doesn't quite compute either.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What are some of the barriers, I suppose, that people face in terms of a values-based living? Sort of what kinds of patterns do you see that kind of get in the way, perhaps, and how might we sort of help people navigate those sort of blocks?
Well, I mean, it's a nice segue from what we were just talking about. Pain is a barrier.
Yes, right.
All critters, including us humans, we want to avoid pain. And humans, not only do we want to avoid pain, but we're told that we should avoid pain. That a good life means that you're not feeling pain. And if you are feeling pain, there's something wrong with your life, right? And so we're getting all of these messages to avoid pain. And then our life becomes oriented around avoiding pain. But I have never once, when I can really like dig down with a human, I've never once met somebody that on their tombstone wanted, like, here lies Stan. He worked really hard to have as little pain as possible in his life. Like, that's just not what we want in our lives, right? And so that is a really big one. These messages that we get around we shouldn't have the experience that we're currently having, and we need to do something to get rid of it.
Mm,
And that's where some of those psychological flexibility skills come in of can you gently, compassionately, kindly, openly make space for the experience that you're having, even when it is painful,
mm,
in the service of getting to move towards your values? So those are that's a main barrier. Other barriers are stories that we have about who we are, who other people are, how the world works, all of this stuff that we get really attached to. That can be a barrier as well.
mm, mm,
And so that's where some of those psychological flexibility skills like diffusion and acceptance, selfish context come in.
mm. Yes, I suppose threat system activation is
Yeah.
part of all of that in sort of
Yeah.
in those terms, I suppose, that
Yeah.
when we are a bit threat system activated, it can be tricky to really stay the course with certain values or even have that uh, mind awareness and intentionality to kind of act in those values based ways. We're more
Absolutely. Yeah.
motivated to protect ourselves from threat, I suppose.
And then it can be really cool if you can get to the place where your threat system is activated and you notice, oh, the opportunity for me to live out my values here, let's say it's my big-hearted values is, how can I show up big-heartedly to this person who feels so much fear and threat, whose threat system is activated? Like, how do I treat her with kindness or open-heartedness? And so, even in that moment when my threat system's activated, I can respond to myself. This may be where the concept of self-compassion comes in. I can
Mm,
respond to myself in a way that is consistent with my values. Even when, I'm all activated and maybe behaving in a way that's like not as skillful as I would always like.
mm, mm. You mentioned the tombstone a moment ago with, I think,
Mhm.
my name on it, I think, if I remember.
Sorry about that.
But I like sometimes that as a way in that you sort
Yeah.
of kind of think forward about, how I often say, someone is saying a speech about you at your 65th birthday as opposed to the
Hmm.
tombstone. But yes, that can be a nice way to reflect too and to start to maybe put into words or have a sense even of what the values are. Like how would I like to remember my life or be remembered in my life?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you think about, like, let's say you got the really perfect ending, and right before you very peacefully pass away into whatever is the next, you had just a split moment to look back, and you got to have that moment of, ah, that, that was a well-lived life. What does that well-lived life look like? And if you can kind of put yourself at that moment of saying, oh, like I did it, that was a well-lived life. That can also be a really beautiful place to start kind of exploring and creating, crafting. What does that well-lived life look like?
Mm, yeah. It's sort of gives you little shivers, doesn't it, when
Yeah,
to stop and
yeah.
think about that and to imagine really getting to that moment and having a sort of a just a deep satisfaction of life. Obviously, we have our lives are mixed in terms of all the different bits and pieces, but yeah, just being able to capture that little sense that it was a life well lived.
Yeah,
Um,
that my life was in the service of something that mattered to me. Like
mm,
that, who would want, like, when you asked at the beginning, like, why values are important, I'm sort of like, I can't think of anything more important,
yeah,
right?
right.
Than getting to say
Yes.
my life, to the best of my ability, in its flawed way, was lived in the service of what mattered to me. I liked being who I was.
How do you explore the wider social, cultural, systemic kind of forces, I guess, at play or
Yeah.
that maybe shape or even constrain sometimes, a person's values?
Yeah. It's tricky, right? Because I'm a behaviorist. And so if I have my behavioral hat on, my little science hat, of course our values are shaped by our learning history. But that's not really a useful way for me to live my life or talk about it with clients. And so, what I talk about is when we're connected with our values, we have the experience of them as being freely chosen. So, I'm not saying in some ontological way, like your history has nothing to do with what you choose to value. I'm saying it's this experience of, yeah, but if I got to choose any way of being, I like being whimsical in the world. I
Mm,
just do. And of course, my history helped shape that.
yeah.
But then there are these other societal influences that we really want to, I choose to kind of validate my clients and say, um, I used to work in a context, a geographical context, where being LGBTQ would not be safe for people, would not be physically safe for people.
Mm,
And when I would work with gay, lesbian, trans, non-binary clients in that context, it's like how, if they have a value around authenticity, how do you get to live that value in that context where it wouldn't be safe to be as out as here I'm in Portland, Oregon. It's a very different context, right? Um, and I go back to this is actually why I really love values, is because your context does not get to determine whether or not you get to live a meaningful life, a values-based life. Anybody with any history in any context at any moment gets to live a life that is in the service of their values. How those values get expressed does need to take into account the context. So, my clients that were living in that context where it would not be physically safe for them to live an out life, they learned how to live authentically in very different ways, or authenticity looked different to them, right? But you still get to take a next step towards authenticity. So it's a yes and sort of thing.
right. Yes, yes. The importance of safeness, in a way,
Hmm.
you've really highlighted there that depending on where we are and when it is and those sorts of things, the safeness to live our values or certain aspects of our values is sort of can be tricky as well, and
Yeah.
yet the idea is to not therefore not live a values-based life, but to find ways to still safely engage with those values
Mhm.
and in a way that yeah can still feel really meaningful and satisfying and so on. It reminds me a little bit of Viktor Frankl's Man's
Yeah,
Search for Meaning sort of thing. You know that I
absolutely.
yes that
Yeah.
idea of even in that those the awful circumstances of suffering that still being able to the one piece that's still free is within ourselves sort of thing and living a meaningful life.
And it's to me, it's the great equalizer. Like it can be very, I'm a therapist most of the time, and it can be very, very painful to see the injustices and all of the suffering in the world. And so values for me are this the great equalizer. Like it doesn't matter who you are, where you were born, or what life kind of dealt you. You too get to live a meaningful life. I'll give you another example. Adventure, being living adventurously is another thing I like to live towards, value I li like to live towards. I am a 52-year-old woman who, kind of looks like a kindergarten teacher, right? Adventurous is not me living adventurously, is not, I'm not going to go up and hike Everest tomorrow. That is not what living adventurously looks like. But living adventurously was actually just 2 days ago. I was hiking with my partner, and we had a choice between a hike that for me would have been like easy and lovely and nice, and a hike that would have been like a real challenge. And I chose the challenging one because it was like, oh, that's kind of adventurous for me. It's the one I don't know very well, so I'm going to do that one. It's not Everest, but it was my version of adventurous.
Yes, it's interesting. My version of my values is sort of
Hmm.
perhaps what we're trying to think about there.
Hmm.
And your partner was there, and
Hmm.
I guess I'm sort of jumping a bit to a conclusion, but perhaps
Hmm.
supportive in
Yeah.
some of that. I mean, is there a role for systems to support individuals to
Oh,
be able to safely live their values?
I mean, that for me, I think is the definition of a healthy, loving relationship.
Hmm.
I don't need my partner to share my values.
Hmm.
I need my partner to know what I would choose to value and then be a champion of that in my life. And so I will often use the metaphor of salted chocolate.
Ah,
So if you have chocolate, chocolate's lovely, it's wonderful. If you put just a tiny little bit of salt with chocolate, it doesn't taste salty. It tastes more chocolatey. And when I think about relationships and values, like I want my partner to be the salt to my values chocolate. He knows that I love being whimsical. He knows that it's hard for me. It causes me pain, but I really love being open-hearted. So when he sees me doing that, he'll champion that. And when he sees me moving away from that, he'll be like, "Hey, honey, what's happening there? This isn't who you want to be. You're closing off, you're constricting." And what a beautiful kind of thinking about relationships in that way, rather
yes,
than like, how do we match the exact same? Doesn't
yes,
matter.
yeah.
Mhm.
The salt even makes the chocolate just that little bit spicier too.
Exactly, right, exactly. It's a little more interesting.
And I
Yeah,
suppose when that can happen at a societal level, it makes for a healthy, loving society, I suppose. And wouldn't
absolutely.
that be kind of the dream? I
Yeah,
think.
and even if even if I could think of therapy as being the society, like we got a long way to go for society in general, but even if we could use therapy as, what if therapy got to be about helping people really being a champion for what your client values? Like
Yes.
that's my role. That's my role as a therapist, helping
Yeah.
them contact it, and then really being a champion for it, even if it's not what would float my boat, not my way of being, but that's beautiful, wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, bringing it back to you as a therapist, how
Hmm.
have you? I think you've given us a flavour, but how have you personally navigated staying connected to your own values? I suppose as a therapist, but especially working, with suffering day in day out, and or you're just doing the work of a
Yeah.
therapist.
Um, well, I will tell you, I tell this to all of my supervisees too, so I will share it here. And I share it with my clients sometimes too, that I mean, I have been very fortunate to get a very good education, and I have had amazing mentors, and I've learned a lot to be a good therapist. And if there's one little tool that I have learned that makes me a good therapist to the extent that I am, it is this practice. So no matter how busy my day is, of course, I like prepare for a session and I think about, oh, what do I want to do or whatever. And then no matter how busy my day is, I put all of that aside of what I want to do, and I sit and I close my eyes, and I have this intentional practice of picturing the person, my next client, who they are in their life. I picture people that or critters that love them. And then I ask if this was the last hour that I could ever be with this person, how would I want to show up? And you'll notice it's not what would I want to do? What do I want to teach? What do I want to change for them? How do we want to help them? It's not even that. It's how would I want to be with them? And I get really clear on who I want to be with my client. And then I bring them in the room. And when I notice kind of getting caught up in trying to get rid of their pain and suffering, which is often how we therapists get off track, right? Like I
Hmm.
do all my juggling, and have you tried this? Have you done this? I go back to, wait, am I being the person that I want to be? And so that's a values practice I do multiple times every day that helps remind me. And the cool thing, what's really fun is some of my clients know that I do this. And so now some of my clients, they're waiting in the waiting room and they're doing the same thing. And they know I'm doing it for them and they're thinking about how they want to show up. So we're doing this sort of mutual values practice together before
Yes.
we even start therapy. It's very fun. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Very fun and cool and sort of it is the practice, isn't it? It's sort of
Exactly.
the thing that transfers it from the just the therapy room conversation to
Mhm.
actually doing the thing. And
Exactly. Yeah.
it's interesting practice because I think you said, how do I want to show up for them? So
Hmm.
it's kind of it's to do a little bit with really kind of recognizing the other person and their situation
Yeah.
and who they are and showing up
Yeah.
in a way that is somewhat um, sort of specific to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Seeing the humanity in the other person and saying, I have an opportunity to show up to this human, to this humanity. And in our context in therapy, a human who's suffering, how would I want to show up to that suffering?
And in many ways, that does bring us to the topic of compassion, or the word, I guess, the
Yep.
compassion. There we are, because yes, it's something of a compassion practice and of a values practice. Kind of nicely, all together. I mean, and this is one of the things that I've been curious about because I take something of a compassion focused therapy approach, and we
Hmm.
might see compassion as an evolved motivation or something that where it's that idea of being sensitive to suffering in self and others and with a commitment to try to alleviate or prevent that suffering. It's a kind of
Yeah.
a motivation and CFT takes an evolutionary kind of biopsychosocial approach. But where do you see compassion as a concept or construct fitting with
Yeah.
this values-based kind of psychologically flexible way of working?
Yeah, so this is a great example of how words can be tricky when it
Yeah.
comes to values, because compassion is one of those words. Like when I'm starting to do values exploration with people, people sort of have the sense of like, oh, I want to be compassionate. And it's like completely dead when they're talking about it. There's no sort of like life or vitality there. When I was watching you say the word compassion, there's like energy there. You're going like this, like there's this like felt sense for you of like, oh, I'm drawn to that. That's the value. And I don't care if we call that compassion. I don't care if we call it kindness. I don't care if what we call it. That whatever it was that is like motivate drawing you there, I'm interested in exploring more of that. So
Yeah.
sometimes for clients, they will come up with the word like, I want to live compassionately. And then we talk about what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
Because sometimes their attempts to alleviate suffering is not actually out of compassion, it's about avoidance. And
Uh-huh.
then, so
Yeah.
we have to also look at like, how's that functioning for them?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I appreciate that because one of the things that can happen when one bandies the word compassion around is that people have different feelings about it.
Yep.
Of course, they can have the fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion, which we often look at and work with in CFT. But I suppose
Hmm.
sometimes compassion just isn't a word that evokes that vitality for them. And so
Exactly.
it's a really
Yeah.
useful thing. I'll think about this some more. That the idea that we don't want to get too caught on a word
Hmm.
because what we want to get to is the sense of the value or the idea behind the word and
Exactly.
you know but it's compassion might end
Right,
up
right, right.
sort of but no it's not sort of thing. So yeah, it's
Right.
that's a really interesting sort of thought.
Hmm.
Well, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. There's so many very helpful takeaways. I really appreciate hearing all that you've had to say about values and just the important thread really that they help
Yeah.
to create for us to live what might feel like a good life. So, yeah, Dr. Jenna LeJeune, thank you very much for speaking with me on compassion in a t-shirt.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.